The sidereal clock at Gorsefield Observatory had been ticking for 9 years in a building every soul in Thexton swore was empty. Tabitha Orme heard it before she had the door fully open, a clean, patient beat from the transit room, the sound of a mechanism that must be wound every 8 days or die. Dust lay thick on every sill. The stair carried 9 years of cobwebs. The clock stood at the correct sidereal time to the second. She had come because Dr. Nathan Froswell named her, to the fury of his brother. A derelict tower, left to her by the man who had put his own name on her comet, felt less like a gift than a message. 2 schools had turned her away since spring, and the carpetbag in her hand held everything she owned. Fro had been dead a fortnight. Somebody, in 9 shuttered years, had never once let that clock run down. Tabitha stood in the cold and did the arithmetic she was trained for. Winding period, 8 days. Last possible winding within the week. The nearest occupied house, a mile off. Either the village was wrong about the tower being empty, or someone had a key, a lamp, and a reason. She let the door stand open behind her for the light. The hall smelled of cold soot and mouse droppings, and her breath showed inside as it had not outside. 9 years ago this room had held Coco at 2 in the morning and the sound of Fro's boots on the stair. She had been his computer then, £40 a year, the daughter of a Wells harbor master who had taught her spherical trigonometry between tides. The comet had come to her on the 4th of October, 1859, a smudge in the finder that she checked twice before she woke him. She wrote the position in the rough book and had the motion worked by morning. Fro sent the telegram to Greenwich before breakfast, and the telegram carried his name. So did the paper he read in London that winter. When she asked him about it, once, in this hall, he looked at the floor. "The Society will never print a woman's claim," he said. "Half a truth in the record is better than none at all." She packed her box the same week. 9 years of teaching navigation to shipowners' sons had followed, in rooms that grew smaller each time a school changed hands. The last one closed in April. Since then she had answered advertisements and eaten a good deal of bread and dripping, and the £4 in her purse were the whole of her estate. The will had been read 3 days ago in the solicitor's front room at Thexton. Cyrus Fro, alderman of Lynn and the dead man's only brother, sat with his hat on his knee and corrected the solicitor's pronunciation twice. Gorsefield, the solicitor, read again, mildly, "With all fixtures, instruments, and appurtenances, to Miss Tabitha Orme, absolutely." "We heard it the first time," Cyrus said. When it was done, he offered her £40 for the tower and everything in it, sight unseen. "My brother was not himself these last years," he said. "You would be kind to take the money, Miss Orme, kinder than anyone was ever obliged to be to you." "The tower is not for sale," she said, before she knew she meant to say it. "It was left to me, and I mean to see why." "Sentiment is an expensive habit in your position, madam," Cyrus said, and something behind his face went carefully still when she did not look away. The key he passed across the table was bright new brass. He had changed the front lock within a week of the funeral, and the will obliged him to hand over the result. He left without wishing her joy of it. Now the ticking led her down the passage past the shrouded shapes of the library. The transit room door stood ajar. Inside, the dust kept its own honest ledger, thick and unbroken everywhere except one narrow path, trodden clean, running from the garden door to the clock case and back again. The transit instrument stood under canvas that somebody had kept mended against the moths. And the clock itself, Fro's pride, ticked on its stone block with both hands set true. A tin of clock oil stood on the shelf beside it, and beneath the tin lay a paper folded in quarters. She opened it with cold fingers. Ruled columns, dates 8 days apart, marching back year after year, each line signed with a single initial. The last entry was dated 3 days ago. Fro had been dead a fortnight by then. The funeral held, the will read, the new brass lock already on the front door. Whoever tended this clock had kept coming when there was nobody left to pay them. She read the initial on the last line twice, and stood very still in the cold, because she knew whose hand had made it. The dates in the column were written in figures she knew better than her own. 7s crossed in the French manner, 9s curled at the tail like a sleeping cat. She had taught that hand its numbers herself, in her first winter at Gorsefield, when Wilfred Peck was night porter, and privately ashamed that he could make no mark but a cross. He had learned on the backs of spoiled star charts, tongue between his teeth, 60 years old and patient as frost. The initials at the line ends were WP. She folded the register into her pocket and found her heart going quicker than the climb up the passage explained. She walked the tower before the light went, because 4 pounds does not keep a woman who has failed to count her liabilities. The verdict was mixed. The roof over the transit room was sound, its slates whole, its gutter cleared, and that was the strangest entry in the whole account, because everywhere else the house was going down the usual way. Damp had got into the library ceiling. The dome above the great empty pier was seized with rust, its shutter jammed a hand's width open, and birds had been through the gap for years. The well in the yard drew clean water. There was no coal, no candle ends, no dry wood except what the mice had left of a broken chair. One room kept, and the rest let go. Whoever tended this place had chosen what mattered and spent nothing anywhere else. Thexton was a half-hour's walk, 1 street wide, with the plow at one end and the church at the other. Conversation in the shop stopped when the bell rang her in. Mrs. Dan weighed out bread, cheese, candles, and a screw of tea, and took her coins without once saying her name. 2 women by the window examined a card of buttons with great attention. "You'll be stopping up at the tower, then, Mrs. Dan said at last. "There was a gentleman from Lynn here Tuesday, saying the alderman means to have it down by Lady Day. Saying other things besides." "What sort of other things?" "The sort a woman pays for listening to," said Mrs. Dan, weighing the cheese. "Then he knows more than I do," Tabitha said. "I'd pay to have coal carried up, if anyone in this village carries coal." One of the women at the button card spoke without turning round. "Quantrell's boy carts coal. He'll not cart it there." "Then I'll carry what I can," Tabitha said, and counted her change twice on the counter, where the shop could watch it done. A small girl by the door spoke up clear. "The tower's got a light that walks, of nights. Everybody's seen it." Her mother took her out of the shop by the arm. She asked after Wilfred Peck at the plow, since there was nowhere else left to ask. The landlord polished a glass. He had already polished and said Peck lived out past the rabbit warren, kept bees, and had not held with company since his wife died. "Deaf as that door," he added. "You'd want to write your business down, and he'd want not to read it. He's buried a wife off that heath." Company went in the box with her, to his mind. She walked out by the Warren path anyway. The cottage was shut tight, smoke standing thin above the chimney, hives humming along the garden wall. She knocked twice and waited long enough to feel foolish. Nothing moved except the bees. On the way back, she could not have sworn whether the curtain in the single window had shifted or whether she had only wanted it to. By dusk, she had claimed the old computing room because it was small enough to warm and its window looked over the heath. She swept the hearth, burned furs and the honest half of the broken chair, and ate bread and cheese off her knee with her boots against the fender. 3 shillings and 8 pence gone already, and winter 6 weeks off. She set the winding register on the mantel where she could see it. The fire drew well. The smoke, she supposed, could be seen from one end of the valley to the other, and there was no help for that. Full dark came before 7. She was copying figures from memory into her own notebook, for the comfort of it, when a light rose out of the low ground half a mile off and began to cross the heath. It came steadily, without hurry, a lantern carried by somebody who knew every rut in the path. It was 5 days too early for the clock. It was coming for the smoke. Then Tabitha blew out her candle and stood in the dark of the window, watching the light swing round the tower's blind side toward the garden door, whose lock nobody had troubled to change. Below her, patient and unhurried, the latch lifted. She went down with her candle unlit, feeling the stair with her hand, and stopped where the passage turned into the old kitchen. The garden door swung in. Lantern light walked across the flags, up the dresser, and found her face. Nobody moved. Then the light dipped, and an old man came in cap first, stooped under a sack, and set the sack down as gently as an egg basket. "Miss Orme," he said, in the loud, flat voice of a man who has never heard himself say anything. "You've grown thin." Wilfred Peck had grown old instead, past 70, white about the jaw, the same heavy shoulders she remembered carrying coal up the tower stair a lifetime ago. He took his cap off and stood holding it, and she had to look away for a moment before she could be sensible. She lit her candle from his lantern and fetched her notebook, and they talked the only way left to them, she writing large in pencil, he answering aloud with his eyes on the page. "Why do you come?" "The doctor paid me," he said. 5 shillings the quarter. These 9 years, to wind her and true her and keep the wet out of the one room, paid till he died. She wrote, "And since?" Peck looked at the sack of peat he had carried up a dark heath at 7 o'clock on an October night. "Weren't the pay by then?" he said. She wrote, "What was it then?" He turned his cap over once in his hands. Doctor trusted me with her. Nobody trusted me with nothing before. You'd not leave a trust to run down neither. She wrote. What did he tell you? Peck answered slowly, the way he did everything, laying the words down like slates. The doctor had come to him 9 years back, the same month Tabitha left, the same season the observatory shut. Keep the clock going, keep it true, keep the one room dry, and say nothing to a living soul. He said, one day Miss Orme will come. The clock must be right when she does. Tabitha sat with her pencil not moving. 9 years Fro had paid a deaf man to keep time for her in an empty tower, and in 9 years he had never once sent her a line she could have answered. All the way from Thexton she had decided the bequest was a rich man's apology, bought cheap at the end. This was older than the end. This had been arranged the same season he ruined her. One thing she could not make sense of, and she wrote it plainly. How does a deaf man know a clock is true? Peck almost smiled. He took her to the transit room, pulled the canvas from the instrument with a housekeeper's economy, and brought out of the drawer beneath the clock case a card ruled in the doctor's hand. Dates, star names, and times, years of them, closely written. On clear nights, he said, he set his eye to the glass at the minute written, and if the star crossed the doctor's wire while the second hand stood inside the pencil line, she was true. If she erred, there was a table for the correcting screw. Tabitha read the card by candlelight and did what her father had trained into her before she was 12, took the next entry, worked the reduction in her head, and checked it. Exact. Fro's figuring, whatever else the man had been, was exact. Then she saw the thing that mattered. The card was full on both sides, predicted transits marching down the columns year after year, and the last column ended in June of 1869, 8 months from now. After that, nothing. A man who meant the clock to run forever would have left more card. She wrote one more question while Peck buttoned his coat. Who else knows the clock goes? He read it twice. Nobody living, he said, saving maybe a Lynn man who came in April. Tried the garden door. Stood a long while with his ear against it, then wrote in a little book and went off down the heath. April. Fro alive, the will not yet read. And already a man from Lynn standing at the door with a notebook, counting. Peck settled his cap and took up his empty sack, and paused in the doorway. I'll bring eggs, he said, as though that concluded the business. The lantern went away across the heath, steady as arithmetic, and Tabitha stood a long while in the transit room, listening to the clock spend its seconds, wondering what in this tower had been worth counting before its owner was even dead. 6 brown eggs stood on the step at first light, packed in hay, with a sack of peat leaning against the door. There was no note. Peck did not spend paper. Tabitha boiled 2 eggs, banked the fire, and gave the morning to honest triage. The broken pane in the computing room she covered with pasteboard and paste, which would do until it would not. The flue she swept with a furze bough tied to a clothes prop. Then she wrote her accounts on the back of a spoiled star chart, £3.16 and 4p remaining, against glass, coal, bread, and a month of oil for 2 lamps. Under the figures, she wrote the one asset Thexton could not buy. She could reduce a lunar observation faster than most men in England. She spent an hour on a careful letter to Captain Ansell of Lynn, whose son she had taught navigation, offering chart corrections and tide tables done cheap and exact. The walk to post it brought back a letter waiting at the shop. Mrs. Dan slid it across with the change. Lynn postmark, she said, neutral as her own scales. They write quick, that family. They always did, Tabitha said. Messrs. Pellew and Son, solicitors of King's Lynn, begged to inform Miss Orme that the scientific instruments, books, and papers at Gorse Heald were claimed by Alderman Cyrus Fro under a deed of family gift, and lay outside the late doctor's power to bequeath. An appraiser, Mr. Leggett, would attend on Thursday week to take inventory. She was advised to remove nothing. Tabitha read it twice on the cold walk home. If the claim held, the will left her a stone shell and a staircase. The books would go to Lynn. So would the transit instrument. So would the clock, and the first thing an appraiser's porters would do with a clock is let it stop. That afternoon she went through the library like an auditor with a grudge. The observing ledgers stood in a numbered run on the driest shelf, Morocco spines, 1,841 through 1,858. There the run ended. The rough book for 1,859, the one whose last October pages were half in her own hand, was not in the library, and by the even lie of the dust it had not stood there for years. It had never come back to the shelf at all. On the desk below she found a quarto off-print, its farther pages still uncut. On the comet of 1859, discovered at Gorsefield Observatory, by Nathan Froe, M.A., F.R.A.S. Her sentences were in it. Her reductions were in it. Her name was not. She read 2 pages, put it down with care, and went and swept the kitchen until the broom's rhythm settled her hands. When Peck came on Saturday with more peat, she wrote in her notebook, "Did the doctor burn papers?" at the end. He read it and looked insulted on the dead man's behalf. "Burned nothing. Not so much as a sum gone wrong. I had the sweeping of his grates 12 year. Ash tells you what a man is, Mrs. His was pipe and coal and never paper." He shouldered the empty sack, then added, unasked, "Last summer he sat up there most clear nights. Writing, not looking. Lamp going till morning." She wrote, "Writing what?" Peck shrugged with the shoulder that was not under the sack. "Never asked. He paid me to keep time, Mrs., not questions." The nights that followed she gave to arithmetic. She worked through the printed paper's elements by candlelight, line by line, the way she would check a pupil's exercise, and the old error rose to meet her like a face she knew. In November of 1859, Froe had carried a logarithm wrong in the period computation. She had caught it then, corrected it in the margin of the rough book, and shown him. The off-print kept the mistake. Printed, bound, read to the Society in London, the mistake stood to this day, and it stretched the comet's period by the better part of a year. His figures brought the comet back in the spring of 1870. Hers brought it back in the second week of June, 1869. She sat back from the candle and looked at nothing for a while. The transit card in the drawer downstairs ended in June of 1869. The clock was not keeping time. It was keeping an appointment. And no man keeps a 9-year appointment out of memory. Somewhere inside these walls, the 1859 rough book was waiting to be exact in front of witnesses. She had until Thursday week to find it, before a man from Lynn came to count everything in the house. The instruction Froe left Peck had 2 halves, and she had been hearing only one of them. Keep the clock true, yes. But also, keep the wet out of the one room. Nobody spends 9 years keeping a room dry for a clock's sake. Brass forgives damp far better than paper does. Paper. She stood in the transit room with the lamp held low and looked at a floor she had walked for 7 years. Between the instrument's 2 stone piers there had once been a hatch, and under the hatch the shallow pit where they set the mercury trough on nadir nights. The hatch was gone. Boards ran over the place now, close-fitted, screwed down with square heads, their joints laid crosswise to the old walkway. Weathered gray, but not 40 years gray. 9, perhaps. She broke a table knife on the first screw and skinned 2 knuckles on the second. Peck found her there when he came at dusk, read the floor, then read her face, and went away without a word. He came back with a proper turn screw and a cold chisel, knelt down on the other side, and set to work as though they had agreed on it a week ago. "Doctor's screws," he said to the floor. Square heads was his buying. Never trusted a nail where a screw would go. The screws came up one at a time, square heads shearing, old wood complaining. It was full dark before the last board lifted, and the lamp showed the pit below, dry as the inside of a biscuit tin, which after 9 wet Norfolk winters was its own kind of testimony. The mercury trough was gone. In its place, set up on 2 battens to keep it off the stone, sat a tin box the size of a small deed chest, its lid soldered down along every edge. They lifted it out between them, heavier than it looked. Peck worked the chisel along the solder seam with the patience of a man opening a hive, and the lid gave all at once, with a sound like a shilling dropped on slate. "So that's what the dry was for," Peck said, mostly to himself. 9 winters keeping weather off a tin. She wrote, "You never looked?" "Weren't mine to look at," he said, as though the question puzzled him more than the box did. On top lay the observatory's letter-copying book, marbled boards, 1859 to 1861 on the label. She turned the pages standing up, too quick at first to take anything in. There was the copy of the Greenwich telegram, the 5th of October 1859 in Froe's hand, discovered this night at Gorsefield, a telescopic comet, position and motion following. His initials under it. Her comet, 4 hours old, already wearing his name. Further in, folded small and kept, were letters that had come the other way. Cyrus Froe, November 1859. If the woman is inclined to make a noise, pay her the quarter and let her go quietly. A discovery in the family is worth more than your scruples, and it will do more for what you owe me than your lectures ever did. Tabitha read that one twice. Then a copy in Nathan's hand, March 1861, addressed to his brother. You shall have your interest when I have it. I will sign no deed of gift, now or ever. The instruments must follow the observations, and both are spoken for. She sat down slowly on the edge of the pit with the book open on her knees. The deed Pellew and Son were waving at her had been refused, in writing, 7 years before the man died. And Cyrus had known since November of 1859 exactly whose comet his family name was wearing. One thing more lay in the box, wrapped in oilcloth and sealed with wax at the corners and the center, 5 seals unbroken. The direction was in Fro's hand, steadier than a dying man's had any right to be, for Miss Tabitha Orme. To be opened before witnesses, and not before the 10th of June, 1869. It had the size of a quarto ledger and the weight of one, and she knew the size of the 1859 rough book the way she knew her own boots. She sat with her knife in her hand for a long moment. Alone, tonight, the seals would cost her nothing to break, and the answer would cost her everything to prove. Papers a discharged servant claims she found are worth exactly what her word is worth, and she had 9 years' schooling in what that fetched. Sealed, dated, and opened before witnesses, it was another kind of thing altogether. She put the knife away. "Do we put her back?" Peck said, too loud in the quiet room. She nodded, and wrote, "All but the letter book." He eyed the book under her arm the way he eyed weather. "He kept that box dry 9 year. You keep that book better." They set the box in the pit with the packet inside it, screwed down every board, and rubbed lampblack and dust into the bright screw heads. The letter book she carried upstairs under her arm. Pellew had advised her to remove nothing. Pellew could advise the wind. Thursday was 6 days off, and now she knew what the man from Lynn would truly be sent to find. She spent the next 2 days making the tower look the way Lynn believed it was, dead. The letter book went into her carpetbag among her own teaching manuals, Norrie's navigation and a shilling arithmetic, her property, listed in no man's schedule. The transit room floor got a fresh sifting of dust, walked over twice in her stocking feet until the boards looked equally forgotten everywhere. Then there was the harder matter. A clock can be hidden from no one who has ears. Whoever stood in the hall on Thursday would hear the tower's heart going and know some hand wound it, and Leggett had stood at the garden door in April and heard exactly that. A dead house must be silent. The clock would have to stop. She wrote it out for Peck that evening. The clock must stop before Thursday. I can set her true again after. It is what I am trained for. It is why he wanted me here. Peck read the page 3 times, and his jaw worked once, and he looked at the clock the way a man looks at livestock he has fed through 9 winters. 9 year, he said, in that flat loud voice, to nobody in particular. And if she'll not start true again? She wrote, "She will," and underlined it, and hoped her hand looked more certain than it felt. Then, "You stop her then. I'll not do it." He went out and stood in the yard among the dead thistles with his back to the window while she opened the case, laid 2 fingers against the pendulum's cold bob, and let it swing itself quiet against her hand. The silence came down over the tower like snow. He did not come back in that night. Leggett arrived on Thursday at 10, a small brushed man with quick eyes, 2 porters behind him and a gig at the gate. He counted the library in 5s, chalked numbers on the instrument cases, and wrote steadily in a little Morocco book that Tabitha watched the way Peck watched weather. In the transit room he stood longest. The clock's glass was dim with the dust she had smeared on it, the hands dead where she had left them. "A fine regulator," he said. "A pity to let such a thing stand. The house is full of pities, Mr. Leggett." He tried the next step anyway. His instructions were to cart the more portable instruments to Lynn for safekeeping. She took Pellew's own letter from her apron pocket and read him the word inventory twice, and invited him to produce an order of the court if he had one about him. The porters looked at Leggett. One of them, chalk in hand, asked was the clock to be numbered with the rest. "Number it," Leggett said. "Number the dust on it while you're about." He smiled with the front of his face, wrote in the little book, and let it go. At the door he turned back, pleasant as a Sunday. "The doctor will have kept a letter book. Every man of affairs keeps one. I find none on the shelves. Perhaps the alderman has it, Tabitha said. He held the only key for a month before I was given it. A great deal may follow a key. Something moved behind Leggett's eyes, gone before it could be named, and the pencil stopped for 1 full second above the page. The alderman is prepared to be liberal, Miss Orme, regarding any private memoranda that may surface. Liberal, she said, as though weighing the word on a scale. Your men have chalked everything but the well bucket, Mr. Leggett. Good day. From the window she watched the gig away down the track, and saw him look back once, and up, at the shuttered slit of the dome. The next clear night, Peck came at dusk without being asked. She uncovered the transit instrument, chose her star from the doctor's card, and put her eye to the glass while the heath went black around the tower. The wire hung across the field, finer than any spider draws. When the star touched it, she found she was counting the beat aloud, seconds given out in a firm schoolroom voice for the benefit of a deaf man. She stopped, ashamed. But Peck was reading her lips and nodding on every count, so she went on to the end. She worked the reduction on the top of the case, set the hands, and freed the pendulum. The tick came back, and the room was right again. Then she opened the winding register on the shelf, ruled a fresh line under 9 years of entries, wrote the date, and handed Peck the pen. He signed his 2 letters with the care he gave everything. She took the pen from him and put her own initials beside his, the first new hand in that column since the year her comet went to London without her. 2 sets of initials on one line. 223 days to the 10th of June. The glass began falling on a Tuesday in the 2nd week of November, and kept falling. Peck came up at dusk with his barometer face on and wrote nothing, only pointed his thumb at the sky over the sea, where the clouds stood in a long gray shelf like a raised arm. They spent an hour wedging what could be wedged. The dome's jammed shutter, open its hand's width these 9 years, sat 40 feet up and would not shift for a crowbar. And there was no ladder in the county she would have trusted in that wind. It would have to stand its luck, as it had stood 9 winters of it. Its luck ran out after midnight. The gale came off the sea in earnest, and the shutter went with a crack she felt through the stair rail, wrenched loose and gone end over end into the dark. After it came the rain, straight through the open slit into the equatorial room, and then down, finding the spiral stair, and running it like a beck. Tabitha met the water at the transit room door with every blanket she owned in both peat sacks, and Peck was beside her before she knew he was in the house, barefoot in his boots, ramming sacking into the door gap. The dam held. The floor darkened at the joints anyway, water working under the flags from the far side, and she watched it creep toward the boarded pit and made the only sum the night allowed. They had the boards up in the wet dark in 20 minutes, skinning old wounds, and hauled the tin box out and through to the computing room fire. When she turned round for Peck, he was gone, and so was the lantern, and through the rain she heard the ladder knock against the tower's outside wall. She shouted his name at the top of her lungs, and shouting was no use at all. She stood in the doorway with the rain going through her, and she could not leave the water fight to stop a deaf man 40 feet up in a Sella gale. He fell the last 6 feet of the descent, when the lashing was done and the flapping quieted. The ladder foot slid in the mud and dropped him onto the well surround, ribs first. He got himself up before she reached him, which told her nothing except that he was proud. He sat the rest of the night in her chair by the fire, gray-faced, holding his side, refusing the bed by pretending he had not seen her write the word. Toward dawn he said, to the fire, "Shutters fast." There was nothing to write back that his ribs did not already know. Daylight showed the bill. The shutter lay a quarter-mile off in the firs, folded like a hymn book. The equatorial room stood open to the sky, its floor an inch deep, plaster coming off the wall in gray sheets. The transit room had kept dry, all but one corner, and the clock had never broken its beat, which was the single item on the credit side of the page. £20 would scarcely close the dome. She had £2.11 and a tin box she could no longer hide, because the pit under the floor now held half an inch of standing water. The box lived where she lived after that, under the bed, which was one more thing Lynn could be right about. Mr. Gedge the surgeon came up from Thexton at noon, strapped Peck's ribs, took his shilling, and looked round the computing room slowly on his way out. The fire, the old man, the blankets drying, the woman with skin knuckles. "You keep odd company for a dead house, Miss Orme," he said. "He fell keeping my roof on. I'd call that better company than most keep. No doubt. Ribs are ribs, however earned. Strapped 3 weeks, and no ladders till Lady Day." He went, And by Friday the village had it that the tower light was flesh and blood after all, and had a name, and the name reached Lynn as fast as names do. The letter from Pellew and Son came 2 days behind the gossip. The claim under the deed of gift would be heard in the county court at Lynn on the 14th of January. Further, information had reached the alderman that papers had been abstracted from the property and that unauthorized persons frequented it by night. His clients reserved all remedies. Lastly, and without prejudice, the alderman would now give £60 for a clean surrender of house and contents, the offer open until the hearing. Tabitha read it by the fire with Peck strapped breathing behind her. He read it too, sideways, unashamed. £60, he said. Flat. For a house with a clock in it. He knows something, missus. Or he fears it. £60 was the dome mended, the winter paid for, the old man doctored, and passage anywhere on earth. The 14th of January was 5 months short of the 10th of June. If Cyrus took the tower at that hearing, the appointment would fall due in an empty house, with the clock stopped, and nobody alive who knew to watch. Captain Ansell's answer came the Monday after the gale, and it was the first letter in a year that did not cost her something to open. His boy was second mate on an Indiaman, and still worked a lunar the way she had drilled him. There was a parcel of Admiralty charts wanting correction against the new notices, 30 shillings the set, more to follow if the work was clean. It would be clean. She sat up 2 nights with the charts, and her father's old instruments, and earned the first money the tower had seen in 9 years. 11 shillings of it went on glass, putty, and a village boy who helped her close the worst of the dome room with ship's canvas and battens. The letter book she carried to Mr. Bracy, the Thexton solicitor who had drawn the will, because a woman with a hearing fixed against her needed to know what her paper was worth. Bracy read the 1,861 copy twice, took off his spectacles, and asked her a question that seemed to come from nowhere. "Have you come to apply for what the doctor left you, Miss Orme? Besides the house?" "I did not know there was anything besides the house," she said. "Then ask," he said, oddly formal, and she understood she was watching a man discharge an instruction he had carried for a year. She asked. From his strong room he brought a sealed memorandum, foolscap, 5 seals again, her name on the face in Fro's hand. They opened that one together, since its direction allowed it. Inside was a statutory declaration, sworn before Bracy in December of 1867, the summer's writing Peck had watched burn lamp oil till morning, set fair and witnessed. It declared that the comet of October 1859 had been discovered by Miss Tabitha Orme, his computer, and by her alone. It declared that the period published under his name carried an arithmetical fault, corrected by her in the margin of the 1859 rough book, and that he had suppressed the correction. The rough book lay sealed beneath the transit room floor, to be opened before witnesses on the 10th of June, 1869, when the sky would arbitrate between the printed figures and hers. No deed of gift over instruments or books had ever been executed, whatever paper his brother might produce, and his debt to Cyrus Fro had been discharged in full in 1865, the receipt annexed. The receipt was there, folded, stamped, 8 years of Cyrus's leverage dissolved in one line of a clerk's hand. Bracy took his spectacles off again. He asked me once what I thought of the arrangement. I told him confession came cheaper made in life. He said cheap things had cost him everything so far, and he would try a dear one. Near the end, the declaration stopped being law and was briefly a man. I lacked the courage to be corrected while I lived. I have arranged to be corrected when I cannot flinch from it, by the only computer I ever trusted, and the only judge I never could buy. She sat in Bracy's front room, where the will had been read, and let the whole engine show itself at last. The clock, kept true because an appointment 9 years out needs a timekeeper. Peck, paid and then not paid, because a machine needs a keeper who loves it. The card ending in June, the dry room, the soldered box, the house itself willed to her because a woman needs standing in law before she needs anything else. 9 years she had believed he forgot her the day the telegram went south. He had spent those years building her an apology out of granite, brass, and sworn paper, and had not once had the courage to post her a letter instead. Both things were true, and she found she could hold them both, one in each hand, like the pen and the slate. "He said you would come," Bracy offered, unasked. "He said the clock would fetch you." They set the strategy before the lamp was lit. Bracy would brief Mr. Storr of Lynn, Ansell's man, for the January hearing. The declaration and the receipt would stay in the strong room, produced in court and not before. Nothing would be answered to Pellew but a single line declining £60. Pellew will ask where the book has been, Bracy said, comfortable as a man buttering bread. It has been in the cause. It remains in the cause. Walking home over the dark heath, she felt lighter than the facts strictly allowed, until she came up the track and found Peck standing sentry at the garden door with a slate in his hand. On it he had written 4 words in the round hand she had taught him. Linman. Asking. Tin box. Somewhere between Gedge's shilling and the village's supper tables, the box under her bed had become a thing men in Lynn knew to ask after, and the 14th of January was 7 weeks off. The morning after Peck's slate, Bracy drove up the track in his own chaise and took the tin box away to his strong room, entered in his daybook as papers lodged in a cause. It was done by 10 o'clock and looked like nothing, an old lawyer paying a call. 10 days before the hearing, she came back from the village to find the garden door standing ajar, strange mud on the transit room flags, and the pit boards prized up and thrown aside. The pit held half an inch of December rain and nothing else. Whoever had knelt there in the dark was welcome to the water. The county court at Lynn sat in a room that smelled of coal and wet wool, fuller than the list warranted. Word travels along a coast. Cyrus Froe sat at the front in alderman's black, Pellew beside him, Leggett behind with the little Morocco book. Ansel came, and shook her hand where the room could see him do it. Peck came too, in a collar nobody had seen since his wedding, and planted himself in the second row with his slate against his knee like a hymn board. Storr laid on the table a single-ruled abstract, made by Tabitha across 3 winter nights. Every letter, loan, payment, and date in the Froe family's business with the Observatory, drawn up in columns as clean as an ephemeris. Storr had looked at it a long time when she first handed it over, and then said he had juniors who could not brief a matter half so well. Pellew produced the deed of gift with some ceremony. Dated March of 1856, Your Honor. Instruments, books, and papers, conveyed to my client absolutely. Read it in full, Storr said. We are in no hurry this morning. It was read in full. Then he began at the left-hand column of her abstract and walked the court down it date by date. November 1859. Cyrus writing that a discovery in the family would do more for what his brother owed than lectures ever did. The room shifted at the sentence about the woman and her noise, and the judge read it twice to himself, and Tabitha kept her eyes on the table and let the words do their work. March 1861. Nathan's copied answer, read aloud. I will sign no deed of gift, now or ever. Storr laid the question down gently, like a man setting a full glass on a table. Why would a man refuse, in 1861, to sign a deed his brother tells this court he executed in 1856? Then the receipt of 1865, discharging every farthing of the debt the deed was said to secure. Then the declaration, sworn and sealed, with Bracy called to swear to the maker's state of mind. Pellew rose on the expected line. The doctor, Your Honor, was not himself these last years. Bracy, sworn, folded his hands. I took his instructions across 4 hours in December of 1867. He corrected me twice on points of detail. I could wish more of my clients were so far from themselves as that. Storr called for Leggett's little book last. It is a private memorandum book, Pellew objected. It is a summoned one, said Storr. Under oath, page by page, it gave up its April entry. The garden door, and the sound of a clock going in a house the family swore stood shut. Every line had been noted and reported to the alderman while the doctor still lived, a man who had asked nobody to count his goods. The judge looked at Cyrus for a long moment over his spectacles. A family is entitled, Cyrus said too quickly, to concern itself with family property. The sentence lay there in the quiet room and slowly turned over, showing its underside, which was that he had it exactly backwards and everyone present could count. The claim was dismissed with costs before the afternoon light went. On the deed the judge said only this: the court makes no finding as to how this instrument came to exist. The parties may account themselves fortunate that the question stops here. It was as near the word forgery as a careful man goes. The reporter from the Lynn Advertiser wrote steadily through the whole of it, and stopped Tabitha on the steps, the letters of 1859 already copied into his notebook. Whose comet was it, Miss Orme? The sky will answer that in June, she said. The 10th. Bring your notebook up the heath. It was reckless, and she found she regretted none of it. Cyrus passed her at the foot of the steps, hat on, face shut. "Printed figures stand, madam," he said. "My brothers stand in every almanac in England." He walked to his carriage through a crowd that gave him more room than it used to. That evening, Bracy posted 3 letters in his careful copperplate, as the declaration instructed. To the President of the Royal Astronomical Society, to the Astronomer Royal's first assistant, and to the editor of the Advertiser, 21 weeks to the 10th of June. The Lynn Advertiser printed its account in the last week of January, and the letters of 1,859 with it, and after that the post brought strangers' handwriting up the track all spring. Fellows of the society wrote asking particulars. A schoolmaster wrote from Ely. 2 clergymen wrote who kept telescopes and opinions, in that order. The costs order against Cyrus freed her purse, and in April 2 of Ansell's yardmen took the canvas off the dome and closed it with new oak ribs and copper, at cost. Her own chart work paid the bill. By May the tower had glass in every window on the weather side, a mended stair rail, and coal in the store, bought by the half-ton like a household that expects to go on existing. On the 10th of June the tower held more people than it had held since it was built. Mr. Doyne, secretary of the society, came down from London. The Astronomer Royal's office sent Mr. Carrick, his first assistant, a young man who checked everything twice and apologized for it. Bracy brought the packet from his strong room with the seals entered in his minute of 1,867. Storr came, and Ansell, and the reporter, and Gedge, who said he wished to be shown wrong properly, if wrong he was. Mrs. Dan sent up a plum cake, on account, the account being unspecified. Peck stood at the clock. Clouds sat over the heath all afternoon, and nobody spoke of it. Doyne read the direction on the packet aloud, compared the 5 seals against Bracy's minute, and broke them one at a time. Inside lay the rough book of 1,859. Her October was in it, page after page in her own young hand, and in the November margin stood the corrected logarithm, initialed T.O., and under the initials, small and cramped, 2 words in another hand. Scene. N.F. He had initialed the correction, and then he had buried it. The sky opened late, grudging, the way Norfolk does. Cloud coming again from the west, Carrick warned, at the window. If it is to be tonight, it must be soon. Her ephemeris hung by the clock where it had hung for a week, the predicted crossing written plain. Carrick took the eyepiece, because the witness must be no friend of the answer, and Doyne held the card, and Tabitha stood back by the clock with Peck and made herself watch the pendulum instead of the wire. The room went quiet enough to hear 9 years of ticking spend themselves 1 second at a time. "Coming on," Carrick said, and then, after what the clock swore was only 40 seconds, on the wire. Doyne looked from the clock face to the card and back. Within 5 seconds of her predicted time, he said, slowly, for the minute he was writing. Within a hand's breadth of her predicted place. "I shall move the correction of the record at the next meeting of the society." Then he turned to her with the formality men reach for when they are moved. "And how shall the notices style it henceforward, madam?" She looked at the rough book lying open on the clock case. "By its right name," she said. Doyne bowed a 1/4 inch, which from Doyne was a proclamation. "Then the notices will say Orme, 10 years late, madam, and I am sorry for every one of them." Peck had watched her face through the whole of it, hearing nothing. Now he pushed his slate across the case top, and she took the pencil and wrote large. It kept the appointment. The correction was printed in August, and the almanacs followed at the year's turn, and her name went into the columns it should have entered 10 years earlier. The collected edition of Nathan Froe's Observations was quietly given up, its subscriptions returned in full, and at Michaelmas Cyrus left the bench, his health given as the reason. Lynn let the reason stand, and drew its own conclusions at its leisure. Mr. Leggett found employment in Norwich, where houses are counted with less listening. By autumn there were chronometers coming up the track in padded gig boxes, Ansell's masters first and other men's after, because a tower with a true clock and a transit can rate a ship's timekeeper as well as Greenwich and a good deal nearer. On Saturdays, the transit room filled with pilots' sons and whichever village children could be spared, and the quickest hand at figures that winter belonged to Mrs. Dan's granddaughter, who crossed her sevens like a Frenchman because that was how her teacher made them. Gedge brought his watch up to be rated and counted out his coin. "I hold half of it was luck. Mind. Then bring me the lucky half of the watch," she said, "and I'll rate the other." He paid his shilling anyway. Peck was made keeper at a proper wage, which he took under protest and spent mostly on the bees. On a clear evening in late October, she sat alone in the transit room and ruled a fresh card for the instrument, the old one being full. The clock kept its patient count at her shoulder while she worked the predictions forward and set them down: 1,870, 1,871, 1872, year after year, marching down the columns in her own exact hand. She ruled on past years she would have to live carefully to see. This card did not end.